Welcome back, everybody. You might be wondering why I have a box, a Core i7 box that used to have a i7 3770K on top of an AMD 8350 CPU box. Why do I have that? Because I'm going to do something blasphemous. In the background, I have a computer that was not built by me. It was built for a Photoshop studio, and they don't do much, After Effects or anything like that. So the customer had ordered this, and the person who built it put in a micro ATX motherboard, a pretty generic motherboard. It's not the highest end at the time. It's definitely not the lowest end, but it wouldn't have been my choice. The customer ordered 32 gigs of RAM, so I have 32 gigs of 1600 megahertz RAM from Kingston right here. They didn't want to replace it with an i7. So we're going to rebuild this computer with the AMD 8350. Oh my God, I could hear you guys already. Blasphemous, blasphemy, blasphemy. But before you start yelling and waving your pitchforks, there's a really good reason why this customer didn't want to go over another i7. To rebuild this computer with the memory that the customer had would have meant going up a step to the 1150 motherboard, which is still sold now, and getting a 4790K, and that was a processor that's a few years older too. That alone would have cost about $500, just for the motherboard and the processor. And so the customer wasn't going to do that. They had already seen the performance of some 8 cores, and it was perfectly acceptable to them. Now, what is the major difference? They're just doing some retouching and such on Photoshop. They're not doing After Effects now. Now, I do have a little bench here where this is Antec's, so you can go online and you can take a look at this Antec CPU bench, where they actually benchmark some things. And what you see in front of us is the numbers according to Antec when they tested this. Now, the Photoshop CS4 retouch, now the AMD processor is at 13.3 seconds and the 3770K is at 10.3 seconds. The processor in this motherboard isn't even a 3770K. It is an i7, but it's not the K processor. Now, I told this to the customer and said, I'm not going to pay that much for a 3.3 second, difference, at the most. And so he okayed this, and do you know the biggest reason why he okayed it was honestly pricing per performance, because he wasn't willing to spend a lot of money to, build a new, Skylake build or a new. At the time of this video, the Ryzen processors had just been released a couple days ago, so the customer was not willing to spend that much money. And so let me show you what we actually got. We got the AMD FX processor. This is the 4 gigahertz stock and turbo, so 4.2. It has a Wraith cooler. It retails for $200 or so. I got this processor for $130 at our local Micro Center. With that $130, they took off $30 additional off this motherboard. And this is the Asus 970 Pro Gaming Aura board. And what's really nice about this board is that at the end of the AM3 Plus CPU's life, motherboards finally started to get better. And this motherboard features USB 3.1 and it features M.2. And we actually got him on J Micron M.2 SSD, which will go onto the motherboard. And so it has options that, are really rich, for the money. So, yes, we're going to rebuild this. I'm going to do separate unboxings for the motherboard in case anybody wanted to see it, because this is going to be the last generation, I'm sure, the last generation AM3 Plus motherboards that will be released. So, yeah, we'll come back later and see how the build progresses. Okay, so I thought about it and I decided to actually not unbox these the motherboard separately or the CPU separately. I thought it might just be a really good chance to actually just unbox everything for a total rebuild once. Now, again, the pitchfork gets dropped when you see the price. This is the copy of the receipt. And I don't know if you guys can see it, but the 8350 was $130. Discounting $30 off the motherboard was $66.99. So for roughly $200, you get 95% of the power of a 3770K, according to, specifically for what the customers could be doing, according to Antec CPU Bench. That's a no-brainer. Which means the Pitchfork is broken. Anyways, let's take a look at this motherboard, because this is going to be one of the last probably unboxings that we'll do with an AM3 Plus motherboard, and it's been quite a run. Granted, AMD did not do the best of job with single threaded performance on the 8 cores. The Bulldozer up to the Vishera, and AMD was in trouble for a while. But for right now, since they're so affordable, unless you're doing major production work, pair it up with a good SSD and graphics card, and these processors are still going to be able to do mostly everything you really want them, especially at the price point now. And so now this is the Asus 970 Pro Gaming Aura board. Awesome looking case. It's the big thing with this is that you can actually change the lighting on the motherboard. There are LEDs on the south bridge and such, and you can basically change the color on it, RGB, and you can mix and match and all that stuff like that. So it is a 970 chipset. I'm going just to go ahead with a quick unboxing. I've actually unboxed an MSI version of this, and I myself have a 970 from Gigabyte. So let's see what they give in here. They always usually give you pretty good stuff. So let's move the motherboard, and we're going to show you what's on the bottom here. And you get a whole bunch of Pro Gaming cable labels, and they're all in color. Awesome. And then you get the Pro Gaming back I/O plate, and it looks like it's just painted, but looks cool nonetheless. And they only give you 2 SATA cables. It's pretty cheap. Zip ties. Republic of Gamers SLI bridge. This must be for the M.2. And then you get your user guide with your driver disk, and we should get our no sticker. Oh my gosh, blasphemy, no sticker. You can't show it off. But the user guide and manual, pretty standard fare stuff. So let's put everything back in the box real quick and move on to the other components that will go into this build, which will be the addition of a J Micron M600 M.2 SSD, 256 gig, and we have it right here. This is OEM, so no fancy packaging and such. Read and write, I believe it's 540 to 520, somewhere about that. Don't quote me on that, because I don't have my cheat sheet up with me, and I don't know how fast it actually is. I have one of these myself. For the price, it's really hard to beat. Pretty good amount of storage for like 60 bucks, So, and here we go. It's the shorter one, and I can't remember which numbering that makes it, but it's read write is 500s in the 500s, and it's only running on the SATA 3 bus, so you're not getting the crazy read writes of the more extreme M.2 SSDs there. And I've actually never unboxed the 8350. When I did, it wasn't in this. Now they're including the Wraith cooler. And what is the Wraith cooler? Supposedly it's a quieter fan, because the previous fans were at a rake angle that would just cut through the air and sound like a little jet engine. It's very, very noisy and loud. I mean, it got the job done, but ooh, the Wraith cooler is what takes up most of the. Oh, look at that! What a nice little box. Awesome. And let's see what the cooler looks like. And this is a heavy, big cooler, so it's a lot better than the Intel coolers. The stock cooler they give you. Dang, this thing is big. Okay, so they're perforated here. So basically a little perforation so dust doesn't stick onto them. And it's a honking big cooler. much bigger than the stock cooler. It is different looking, so it's braided cable, which is very nice. And just in case, because I'm sure that the stock thermal grease would work out fine, but for longevity's sake and thermal performance, we're going to use a bit of Arctic silver and not use the stock, thermal paste that is applied onto this heatsink right here. But that's a nice heatsink. Wow, AMD should have just offered that. What the heck, But okay, we'll get it all built up. In case you're wondering, the graphics card that is actually in this that the customer has is a Asus GTX 670. And there's a 2 terabyte Western Digital business class hard drive in the computer already, and the power supply is the Cooler Master 850 watt Silent Pro. I believe that's Gold Plus rated. But it's gonna have Windows 7 Professional reinstalled, and we'll do a final quick follow-up to it and see how it runs. Silly me, I was in such a rush, I didn't even show off the motherboard. Oh, crazy. It's the end of the day, so I can be excused. Well, there's the motherboard. It is a really badass looking motherboard, honestly. I mean, it's got, this is the first motherboard I've seen that they put so much detail into the traces. And look at that, I'm gonna zoom in and you can actually see some of the traces are painted red. That's pretty badass. It just makes it look really nice. This is a great detail in this board. But basically you have your Supreme FX audio card, which is supposedly separated from the main board again. You have a lot of connection options here. So you do have 2 PCI Legacy, and then you have PCI Express here. Let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3 front USB 2.0, and then we've got our USB 3.0 here. We have our M.2 socket right underneath the south bridge, which is nice because some motherboards have them underneath the graphics card, and heat might be a concern for some people. But yeah, I like the placement of the M.2 connector here. And so we have a chassis fan here. We have the CMOS reset jumper right here, and then we have the audio front panel over here. And so I believe this features Intel gigabit LAN, and yeah, your USB 3.0 Gen. This is Type 1 Gen A or something like that, or Gen 1 Type A or something like that. So there's no USB-C on this. So basically, it's going to be legacy USB 3.0 speeds. But you got 2, 4, 6, 8 USB 2.0 connectors in the back, which is pretty generous. Let's see the heatsink, and look at, I like what awesome looking power regulators down here. I mean, that's awesome. Black capacitors right here, and then you have your chokes are just badass looking, basically right there, and one exposed here and stuff like that. So it's just a very aesthetically pleasing motherboard. And on top here we have our CPU, optional CPU fan, and then a pump, so obviously made for water cooling. Very nice options here on this board. So definitely one of the better boards in terms of what you have for feature and placement and such. So yeah, definitely great looking board. And on the back we don't have much of anything, but yeah. So this is going to go into the build, and now I'll get to work, and we'll come back and see how everything looks. Okay, finally got the computer together. There was a hiccup. Bring back the pitchforks. Apparently on this Asus motherboard, the 97 Pro Gaming Aura board, the M.2 slot is not bootable. Meaning you can only use the M.2 as storage. And I found that out when I was building it, and I was pretty pissed. And I had the manual right here. And if we can get close enough, it says M.2 only supports data storage. That would be nice to know if it was on the motherboard box, but it's not. So I had to run back and grab a different SSD, and this is the SSD that I decided to grab because it's close to the price of the M.2 and fairly good read and write speeds. Not the best SSD out there, but definitely worth the price. But it works very well. Got Windows 7 Professional reinstalled, and again, the graphics card is the Asus GeForce GTX 670, and so it turned out pretty nice. There is an LED on the south bridge that keeps changing colors, and when you have a big graphics card like this, you can't even see it, quite frankly. So it's there, I guess, to give some ambiance to it. The computer is fairly quiet. The Wraith cooler that AMD gives you is huge, and it's quiet, and it seems to cool very, very well. There's an Antec fan in the back that we're just reusing here, and then the front fan, well, the SSD in this case is actually up here. And if you're wondering why I did this, if you guys have a keen eye, you saw the zip tie. This graphics card is incredibly heavy, and it bends down. Even though it has a back plate, it still bends down. In this case, doesn't have a graphics card holder right there. So it has a 2 terabyte Western Digital Black in there for storage, which I haven't hooked up yet. But let's go to the front of the case. Let's see, the case, and in the front of the case, there's one 120 millimeter Cougar fan. It's a very quiet fan, and it just is very, very fast too. It can move about 71 to 72 CFM, and this is very quiet. A lot better looking than the Noctua fans, and not as expensive. So the computer is fairly much put together, and I have Valley Bench on. So this is a 1600 by 900 screen, and let me get back up, and it's about to redo and there we go. It's on ultra, but no anti-aliasing. We have about 80 frames per second, roughly. And let me zoom in a little bit more. You can get so we're in the 90s, and we get to the 100 sometimes. And the case is open, so it's running about 74 degrees Celsius. But this is with the AMD 8350 at stock speeds, and I'm not even sure if it's turboing to get this frames per second. Since it's a business computer, I'm not going to overclock it. But it's running 32 gigs of 1600 megahertz RAM. I'm pretty sure if you had quicker RAM, it might be a little bit better. But yeah, it's basically turned out fairly well. Again, for the price, you're getting, we bought everything for much less than we would have if we had to rebuild an 1150 motherboard. I'm getting a premium 1150 motherboard with the 4790K. But this has been a quick overview of a downgrade. What did you guys think? Any questions, any comments? Post them at the bottom of the video. Thanks for watching.